I want to welcome everyone to our webinar in July. Today, we're going to go over last mile automation. We've been talking about it a lot. You may have heard of it through some client demos. Maybe you've seen what we've been posting on LinkedIn, maybe in our newsletters, but we're very excited about this last mile automation. And that very end, once you've gotten a lot of the hard lifting done, the hard work done, and then there's all these additional steps that need to happen at that last mile. So what we've done here is automate it. Just took the latest in technologies and it's an automated process. And it's been such a big hit and it's been so popular with clients that we wanted to put it into a webinar. We want everyone to take a look. And with that, I'm going to kick it over to Tiffany, who is our product evangelist, and she'll deep dive into what last mile automation offers. And as always, ask any questions and I will be the moderator for today. I'll take myself off camera so you're full attention and focus is on Tiffany and our last mile automation. So Tiffany, handing it off to you. Thank you.
Great. All right, welcome everyone. Good morning. I'm Tiffany Russell. I'm our product evangelist here at HubSync. Today we'll be talking about our HubSync last mile automation. I will go through a few slides. If you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat. So for those of you who are familiar with HubSync, you may know what we do in entirety. For those that are new, I wanted to start with this slide. We are an all-in-one platform and we are covering from a tax perspective the entire process from the beginning to the end. Today, we're focusing on what we call the last mile. When I say last mile, I think of everything that we need to do in those final steps to mark that return complete. And what that includes is delivering the tax return to the client, getting the client to sign their e-file authorization forms electronically, e-filing the return, and updating workflow. So in our product today, we have 3 modules that have been covering this for the last few years. We have a tax return delivery module in our product that fetches the tax return automatically. It recognizes all the signature blocks, delivers it to the client. The client has a very modern experience for reviewing their tax return, signing their e-file forms. That's been in existence. That's the first module or the first leg of the last mile we'll be covering. The second module is our electronic filing tracking module. So this is a direct integration where we're seeing the status of any return that's been transmitted to the taxing authority. Has it been accepted? Has it been rejected? We've had bi-directional integration with this module for quite some time, allowing you to release returns directly from HubSync. And the third module, the last leg of the last mile, is workflow tracking and analytics. So workflow tracking is the ability to see all of your workflows inside of HubSync, the status, roll those up into views, dashboards. It's great simply for visibility, but then we also offer bidirectional integration where as you're making changes in HubSync, it's triggering or writing back certain updates to your workflow tool. So those 3 things are what make up the last mile. The automation is a layer on top that's going to do a 3-way connection between those 3 modules: tax return delivery, electronic filing, and workflow tracking. So how does it work? Think in terms of your process today. There's most likely a human doing all of these steps, meaning you have an admin or maybe even a staff person that's responsible for delivering that tax return to the client. As those signature forms are coming back, you have folks who are being notified. They're reviewing on screen that the forms they've received match the deliverables in workflow. They match what you've uploaded and you're ready to release to the taxing authority. They're doing all of this with their eyes. They have multiple monitors on their screen. They're looking at things side by side. They're also responsible for making sure that your workflow product is updated. Do I have all the appropriate deliverables? Are they marked appropriately for e-file? Some things are missed. We are not perfect at keeping workflow updated, as I know many people in our industry are aware of. There's oftentimes missing deliverables rolled forward, marked incorrectly for paper file, maybe from the prior year. All of those things require someone's eyes to look at and make sure that they're updated. As things are being released and you're getting those acceptances or rejection notifications throughout the process, then you also need to go back into workflow and make sure that that's updated accordingly. Or you're moving a workflow to a different status or a different person to take a look and correct. With last mile automation, all of those manual steps in your process are removed and they're done through our tool. To provide you with a visual or a simple flow chart here of how it works. So the very first thing is you're delivering that tax return. This is done through HubSync. We do have a mechanism that can fetch the tax return automatically. It's no longer even a manual drag and drop or upload. It can be retrieved directly from the tax software. Once the client gets it in their hands, again, this happens in HubSync. We have a modern experience around the client being able to see their tax return, see their vouchers, their K1s, etc., all from inside of HubSync. Once they've reviewed their return, they're happy with it, they're going to sign those electronic e-file authorization forms. At this point, we do automate being able to update workflow that you've received those consent forms, either in the form of a date or if you're moving it to a different status, both are supported. The most powerful part of this automation that I will cover in detail is a validation layer that sits in the middle of this entire automation process. It took ample time to develop. We were very thorough with the process. I've seen working with many firms, bots that have been in place. Perhaps you've done a homegrown bot solution. That oftentimes doesn't include a validation. A validation to me is a three-way cross-check. Do I have the required e-file authorization consent forms signed by the client based upon what returns were delivered to the client? Do I have everything that I need? And how does that look compared to my workflow deliverables? Do I have a deliverable for every single jurisdiction that was delivered to the client? And is it marked appropriately that it's to be e-filed? Not that it's to be paper filed. If I have an e-file form and the return says this is being filed electronically, my workflow deliverables should say the same thing. That's the second piece of the cross-check. The third piece of the validation cross-check is, has that return or returns been ready to be released, or they're sitting in an uploaded status ready to be transmitted? Do you have a jurisdiction that's covering every single one of those? There's scenarios that put you at risk with FBARs and other things. So what this validation does is the moment that the client signs the e-file forms, it triggers our validation layer, this engine that sits in the middle. And if all three of those things match that I just mentioned, it would consider it a successful validation. If anything is off, you're missing a deliverable, a return hasn't been uploaded, client didn't sign an e-file form, or there is a missing e-file form compared to a deliverable that's present on the workflow. If none of those things match, or one thing as a part of that whole process doesn't line up, we'll actually fail the validation and notify you as to why. That gives you the opportunity to correct it, review it, and rerun the validation. This is happening every day regardless, and it's oftentimes being ignored, which is why in workflow, year over year, bad data, bad deliverables continue to be rolled forward. This is going to help address those, allow you to fix them, correct the mistakes, and have cleaner data in your workflow product. It's also going to prevent errors, missed filings, things that oftentimes cause the client penalties or just causes them frustration because something wasn't filed in a timely manner. If this validation is successful, we will automate releasing the return. It'll release automatically. There's no need for you to do anything. At that point, we can update the workflow product to note that it's been released. It's awaiting that acceptance. That means it could move to a different status. Perhaps there's a date that needs to be entered into your workflow product. All of that is done automatically. We then, through this process, will make sure that we are monitoring for any acceptances and rejections. From that point, we will also continue to update your workflow product to make sure that it's accepted, rejected, and indicated as such, so you have that visibility. Only if and when all of your deliverables are marked correctly, everything has been completed, that workflow could be completed or closed out at that time. All right, so just to kind of recap on those manual steps of the process that we're removing, anything that you're having folks do today, clicks, opening different systems, reviewing those e-file forms on screen, all of that goes away. Now, there could be, 10% of things that we would consider exceptions because of bad data, because of mistakes where returns weren't uploaded correctly. We're going to catch those, and removing 80 to 90% of this process away from those people who are critical leading up to those deadline days is going to allow them to focus more on critical tasks. It's also going to reduce your bottlenecks ahead of those March and April constricted deadlines and have things filed in a more timely manner. When we look at an ROI, from an ROI perspective, how is this saving you time? From the previous slide, we're talking about very tangible items that are really simple to measure in minutes or hours. There's also many things that I would consider intangible savings, things that are more difficult to measure, but have a very significant impact on your firm and on your business. Here's a list of a few of those here. I think client retention at the bottom is huge. There are mishaps that happen. I've done them myself personally in my career that have affected late filings, client penalties, angry, upset clients. If we can shift 80 to 90% at a minimum of this process to an automated fashion, that is going to eliminate so much and allow you to really pay attention, allow you to monitor discrepancies, ensure that everything is filed well ahead of a deadline. For our current firms,
Would you say you're ready for some questions here, Tiffany?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. So one of the questions that's come in, does the process handle e-file authorization forms?
Absolutely. Yep. So it's covering the e-file authorization forms in terms of a cross-check. We're looking at, do you have 8879s at the Fed level and every single state? And it also does take into consideration when certain states piggyback the federal form. We've marked that. I'm going to show you on screen in a few minutes. We actually hand you what's called a validation mapping table so that you can see all of this data on screen, how that validation layer works. I'll cover that here in just a moment. It also handles if your firm uses state-only SO forms. At most firms I talk to, they do, they don't. It's a mixture of the two. Sometimes it's not consistent. Don't worry, we handle state-only authorization forms, and we also handle any particular states that happen to piggyback the federal.
Okay, great. One more question so far. If we want to hold the return for release for a period of time, like a couple of days, whatever we choose, is that a possibility? Is that functionality that is existing in the product?
Yep. So there is an option for you to put in place what I would call a delay or a hold. And you might be thinking, why wouldn't I want to just release it automatically? Why would I want a delay or a hold? I think in our industry, we've all been burned one time or two. That causes angst in our firm or anticipation for what I would deem an exception to the entire process. And the example that is most often used here to justify a hold is we have clients who get their tax return, they sign their e-file forms, and then they call you or email you and tell you it was wrong, or they need something fixed, or we missed this. And by the time you can remove that return from export, or by the time you can call the e-filer, they've already released it and it's too late. It happens, and it's not often. It's just the times that it has, you felt the pain from it. So in that case, we did go ahead and put in what we would consider a delay, where if you want to hold the automation for 1 day, 2 days, 3 days, whatever that period is for you, it won't trigger that validation or that release until that delay is up. You can always force run the validation. You can also, there's a way that I'll show you in the product for you to disable the validation by client. So if you're aware of a client that does this often, you do not want this to automatically release, you can check a box that disables it until you're ready. We have thought through all of those scenarios.
That's great. Okay, good to hear. That's what we got so far, so I'll let you continue.
Yeah, great. So when considering ROI, or as I go through the second half of our webinar here, I'd like you to start thinking about all of those steps that it does take to complete the last mile. This is an example of an ROI calculation worksheet that we've handed over to some of our clients. It is not all encompassing of your process. We give it to you in Excel so that you can manipulate it yourself, adjust the hours, adjust the rates. But this is a very conservative example, in my opinion. I'm assuming that it takes less than 5 minutes to do things on this list. And even with that, at a return volume of 10,000, you can see that what your current cost could potentially be costing you annually to do these steps. And this, again, is only taking into consideration those tangible time-saving elements. Somebody's clicking here, somebody's opening up a program, somebody's updating a field. Those are very tangible items to measure. The, greater opportunity for savings may lie in some of those intangible things that are more difficult to measure. So with that, I'm actually going to share a different screen at this point. I want to talk more thoroughly about the validation mapping, how that works, how that differentiates what we're doing here against what we've seen other tools, homegrown, third party, what they've done in the market and what thought we put into the validation engine. I'll cover that. And then after, for any existing clients, I'll show you what new columns you would expect to see in your tax return delivery grid. With that, at this point, you should be seeing HubSync. So if you're not familiar with HubSync and you haven't seen it, love for you to see more. You might have questions looking at on our screen. HubSync has what we call spreadsheet as a database functionality all throughout many of our modules. It's what produces this grid view. It allows you to work very Excel-like, collaboratively, real-time, online, inline edit, group, filter, sort. Lots of benefits to it that I unfortunately can't cover right now. But existing clients will understand what we will give you inside of HubSync that you can see, you can touch, you can update is a validation mapping table. This table will give you some out of the box details and mapping, but you'll be able to modify and add to it from there. What it's doing is it's going to map all of your return types from tax return delivery. So think 1040s, partnerships, S Corps, 990s, etc. It's mapping those return types to all of the applicable e-file forms that could be found in those returns. What are those e-file form names? How do those form names map to our workflow type names? So there's a variation of tools. I'd say there's probably 2 to 3 that are the most common that we see day to day. But you can have, default naming conventions for your workflow types, but then you also have the flexibility to add your own and change those names. So you might be thinking, how are you going to recognize what workflow type to update? You don't know our, firm custom naming conventions of our workflows. Well, we would know those because we would put those in this mapping table and we would recognize them. So anything that you've configured yourself in your workflow tool is okay because we'll add it into this validation mapping table. In addition to you having custom workflow naming conventions on your types, you would also have perhaps custom deliverable names. They're not all straightforward, Iowa, Delaware, New York. Oftentimes you have composite, you've got city, and various other deliverables that you've added yourself into your tool. At that point, we would put them into this mapping table so that we know when we get this signed e-file form back, it should update this deliverable. Hopefully that's making sense. Feel free to drop questions in the chat if you have any. The third part of this mapping that is very important is, are we recognizing the electronic filing jurisdiction naming convention? And yes, we are. So it's a 3-way mapping. you would have access to this data. You would be able to come in here and add additional information to it. The moment you do, that validation engine is going to immediately recognize. It's not necessarily a ticket into HubSync to have us do it. It's very self-serviceable so that you can manage this. Tomorrow you go and set up a new workflow type or you go add a new deliverable name. It's fine. Drop it into the validation mapping table and it'll be handled. If it's not present in here or something doesn't line up, that's where the validation is going to fail in the process. We'll be able to catch it and you can correct it. The last thing I'll mention here is we also automatically recognize any of these states or jurisdictions where their e-file forms piggyback the federal. So if you're not using those state-only handling forms, not a problem. We will indicate that here in your mapping table. All right, to wrap things up, if you're not familiar with what our tax return delivery module looks like, we could do an entire walkthrough of that product. For existing clients who do know and are familiar with the grid and all of the columns, what you would expect to see with this automation release is the addition of a few columns. Specifically, I'm showing you 4 here on screen. We'll be pulling out all of the deliverables that are present inside of the return, including those e-file authorization forms so that we know what was included and sent to the client. The moment that it comes back complete, so here, my 8879 tax return delivery status is now complete. When that happens, it's going to automatically trigger a new button for validation. If everything has been successful in the validation, you will see a confirmation message letting you know that there were no issues, this was fine, good to go. We expect to see this up to 80 to 90% of the time when we first get started. This depends on how clean your data is in workflow. If you feel like you've done a really great job, all of your deliverables are where they should be, then you would expect a higher success rate on this validation. If something doesn't match, your workflow deliverables are missing, they're not marked for e-file, you don't have all the appropriate jurisdictions ready for release, or client didn't sign an e-file form, one was missing. If any of those elements are not in line, you will receive a exception warning, failure notification giving you the reason, in which at that point you can go and correct and you can trigger this button to rerun the validation. The last column here, if you do decide you'd like to disable the release on any pre-identified client that may not be a good candidate for this, or perhaps when you're getting started with us, you're looking at a particular client group, an office, a particular team who's going to be testing this in the beginning. In that case, you can disable it for all the others. You will have global tracking on this whole process. You'll have views and filters in the grids. We can even put a dashboard on top for you so that you can see visually with different widgets, bar graphs, pie charts, how this process is performing. With that, I'm going to stop sharing and see if I have any other questions.
We do. So good timing. All right. You talked about ROI. Are there any tools or materials that firms can use to measure that?
Absolutely. If you're interested in this process, the first thing I would suggest is that we do a meeting. We do an even more thorough deep dive into this process in HubSync. But we will also work with you hand in hand to fill out that ROI template. I showed it briefly in a slide. Like I said, we would hand it over to you in an editable fashion, and we can go down the list. We can do this together. Here's the time it takes you to do X, Y, Z. Against pricing, what's your overall time savings? We can hand you that. We can also explain best practices, what our firms today are doing, what they're planning on doing. We recently hosted a client advisory board meeting where all of our firms came together. They talked about best practices. We've learned from experience. I've been meeting with firms daily on this, and even this week. So hearing their feedback might be in line with yours. We're happy to share that information to help you along the way.
Okay. And someone said, interested, who can I contact to get a demo and to get more information on this?
There's an email address, sales@hubsync.com. you can reach out to me, but sales@hubsync.com will get you to the right person too. We'd be very happy to sit down and have a discussion.
Easy peasy. All right. If there aren't any other questions, and I don't see that any other have come in, we will give you back 4 more minutes of your day. We want to thank you for joining us today. You probably have seen a lot of our discussion and awareness and marketing campaigns around last mile automation. We're very excited about it. There's a lot of client input and feedback on this product, and it's so well received. And we hope that you got the information that you needed. And as Tiffany noted, you can reach out to sales or you can reach out to either of us for more information or for a deeper dive on this product. But we're really excited about it. We hope you see the value and how it could, make things easier, less manual, more automated, and a really true ROI. So thank you everyone for your time. We appreciate you joining us. We know how busy you are, and have a wonderful rest of your day. Thanks, Tiffany.
Thank you.
All right. Bye.